So, welcome to our lecture number 81. We are about to study chapter 35 of the second book of the guide. We are it's at page 367 in book 2 of the Pines edition. It's chapter 35, and what we just learned in Rambam was kind of getting us set up for this big discussion he's going to spend in the next several chapters, the issue of prophecy, how prophecy works. Now, if you remember, I can't remember, it was a couple chapters ago where Rambam gave three opinions about prophecy, right? The one opinion was the idea that that of the simple masses, right? The idea that, God decides to talk to somebody, in which case, of course, he can decide to talk to anybody, right? And whoever God decides to talk to, he talks to him or her or it and gives him a prophecy. And then that prophecy comes out, right? And the other approach was what he called the approach of the philosophers, which was the idea that that after perfecting one's intellect and so on, one taps into this knowledge of God, and it's something that comes naturally, something that, so one way of understanding those two different ideas, right? And then Rambam had a third way, which we'll get to in a second, is the supernatural approach to prophecy versus the naturalistic, scientific approach to prophecy. The supernatural approach is God decides to talk to you. And the natural approach is that it's really a scientific phenomenon. It's a phenomenon that when one, through perfecting his or her moral and ethical self and intellectually achieves a certain level, they will automatically achieve that level and gain access to this divine knowledge or divine wisdom, which would be called prophecy. Rambam gave try to think for a minute about the ramifications of taking either approach, right? The ramifications of taking the approach of the simple-minded folk that think that God decides to speak to something or someone, right, is that such a person would be much more apt to take a leap of faith, listen to something that might not necessarily make sense, right? If he or she doesn't understand the mitzvah and the Torah, they'll be easy to say, oh, it's just because God said so, right? Whereas the person who understands it as a result of the accumulation of knowledge and wisdom and experience and morals and ethics and so on would have to understand that wisdom to be a result of the accumulation of all that knowledge. It would be a wisdom that makes sense. And you wouldn't say take a leap of faith. It would be something that makes sense. Bear in mind the difference between these two approaches as we learn how Rambam understands prophecy. The Rambam then said he has his own approach, which he says is our approach, which is kind of a third way. And the third way is that prophecy is a result of all of that work. So it is naturalistic in that sense. It's a way that, however, God can decide who gets access and who doesn't, right? In other words, a person can achieve that high level, right? And he or she can spend his whole life studying and working and so on and so forth and seem to us to be worthy of prophecy, but still not be there, right? Still not access it, right? There's something that comes from above that God says, okay, I'll let you, but I'll not let you. Now, interestingly, as we go through the Rambam, it'll seem more and more clear that somehow this is the Rambam leans much more towards the naturalistic side than to the supernatural side, right? In other words, more and more he's going to emphasize the process of becoming a prophet, how one becomes a prophet, how prophecy works, and so on, right? So to the extent that some say that when Rambam says God decides, right, as to who's not going to be a prophet, Rambam is going to drop us hints, and we'll get to some of them tonight, hopefully, and say, well, a person can't be a prophet if he's sad. A person can't be a prophet if he's mad. A person can't be a prophet if he's jealous. A person can't be a prophet if he's any number of things, right? So if he's impatient, if he's so on and so forth, right? It's almost as if he's telling us that God built into the nature of the universe, right? That a person can be a great genius, right? But if he's morally not 100%, he won't be a prophet. And that, if you remember, Rambam said, he said this before, and he's going to say it again in several places, that the way God works through creation is because when he created the world, he set up the world that such and such and such things would happen as a result of such and such and such and so on, right? So if we naturalistically arrive at the level of prophecy, but we didn't really arrive at the level of prophecy because we're not morally all there, then we won't be a prophet. And that's God's way of choosing, so to speak, right? That so-and-so should not get prophecy. But we're going to, and what I just told you was Yosef Ibn Kaspi, who was a 13th century philosopher, a strong Maimonidean. He explains Rambam that way, that what Rambam is really holds is the position of the philosophers. He just adds that when you and I see someone who might be a big genius, but if he's a selfish fill in the blank, right, then he's just not going to, or if he has a tiny flaw, that he will not be able to achieve it. And why morals and ethics are so important. And it's not just, you can't get the prophecy with just wisdom, will become very clear as we understand and learn through the Rambam. That's one introduction I want to make. A second introduction I want to make is Rambam's psychological theory, so to speak. If you remember learning, if you ever learned about Freud's, id and superego and ego, right? Rambam had a two-part understanding of how the human psyche worked, right? There's what he's going to call, according to this translation, the imaginative faculty and the rational faculty. Okay. Now, if you remember, Rambam talked about the intellects, right, that decide to do things, right? That's right. A human being decides, I am going to walk across the street, right? There's the rational intellect. There's also the intellect that decides to make the spheres go around, right? And the ultimate active intellect, of course, is God himself, who decides to make the entire universe exist, right? And Rambam talked about how the intellect, from above, it goes lower and lower and lower and lower until it gets to us. So there's the active intellect. That is the thing in our brain which thinks, okay, I'm hungry, I need food. What's the right way to get food? Well, I need to go get a job. I'll earn a few bucks, then I'm going to go to the grocery store, I'll buy it, and I'll bring it home, right? That's the rational faculty goes through these decisions, and we decide to do certain things. We decide on a much higher level, that same rational faculty starts to think, well, what's the right way to live my life? Where should I live? What kind of community should I live in? What kind of friends should I have? What kind of activities should I involve myself in, right? Why are things the way they are? And then you start doing scientific research and studying Torah and learning and understanding. So the rational faculty is doing that active thinking. That's the active intellect. It's called active, and it's called the rational faculty because it's actively thinking and deciding what to do. Then there's this other thing that's called the imaginative faculty. The imaginative faculty is the thing that most of us don't really have control of. It's the thing that happens most classically when we close our eyes and we dream, right? Right? It's just what our brain is doing, right? And that imaginative faculty, right, is full in most of us of our desires, our wants, our needs, our imagination of how things could be, right? We could be thinking about the things that come in are, I would like to be the president so I can be the boss and tell everybody what to do. I would like to be the general so I can command big armies and blow things up. I would like to be the one who, if whatever person's sexual desires are going to come in. I wanted this. These are the things that I want. I want a giant corned beef every night. And that imaginative faculty is imagining all the things that we want. Sometimes we can imagine nicer things. We can imagine beautiful mountains and rivers and streams. So our imagination is not necessarily bad, but it's the thing that our brain does when we're not controlling it, right? So what we're going to learn in chapter 36, right, is going to be, it's important to keep that in mind. Okay, so when we get to, we have to do chapter 35 first. Another introduction before we do 35 is for Rambam's this whole book, right? The Guide of the Perplexed is to tell those of us, right, who believe in the Torah, right, who Rambam is a rabbi. He's teaching us how to practice Judaism, right? So Judaism has to make sense, right? And what happens when it doesn't seem to make sense? It seems to conflict with knowledge, with science, etc. That's what this book is about, right? So for Torah to make sense, there has to be something special about the Torah itself, right? And what's the Torah? The Torah is when you boil it down, it's the teaching that Moshe gave us in the name of God, right? Through Moshe Rabbeinu, right? In other words, Rambam explained to us before that even the Aseret HaDibros, right, we received through Moshe, right? God spoke to Moshe and Moshe gave it to us, right? So, and there is no other figure like this, right? All the other prophets taught us lessons, taught us a lot of things, and gave us a lot of ideas and prophecies, and taught us a lot about how we should live, how we shouldn't live, etc. But Moshe is the only one that gave us this Torah, these laws, this way to live, this way of life, this religion, right? So Moshe then is more than just a prophet, right? Moshe is on a completely different level. And remember, there's also the underlying thing here of what about the others who claim to have supplanted Moshe. Remember, Rambam was living in a world where one religion, Islam, was claiming that Muhammad supplants Moshe, right? And is now the prophet, right? And Christianity is claiming that Jesus supplants Moshe, right? So Rambam has to explain why Moshe is something special. He's going to say it in 35, but we're not going to really understand it until we really go through a lot more of this book. In fact, I would venture to argue that to really understand chapter 35, you have to stick with me until the end of the entire book of the guide, right? I know, so that you have to now listen to the whole thing, right? Because he's going to say it, but you're not going to understand, well, why? What makes Moshe special? Why, if Moshe is so great, the one question that we're going to ask ourselves that we won't have the answer to at the end of the chapter is, if Moshe is so great and prophecy is something that human beings achieve on their own through their own work, their own moral achievements, ethical achievements, who's to say, thanks, Billy, I hope everyone here will be into the end. Then who's to say, and Joseph, I'll get to you in a second, who's to say that someone else won't come up next year, right? Who's to say that, that Jesus didn't achieve that level and now he could beat out Moshe and tell us new lessons? Who's to say that Muhammad can't? Who's to say that Joe Schmo next year, whatever prophet you find on the corner of Times Square, whoever that might be, who's to say that guy didn't achieve the level of Moshe and can now teach us things that Moshe didn't? That question we won't have an answer to at the end of 35, other than that's the way it is. But I promise you, I can't promise you that you'll be satisfied with the answer, but I could promise you that you will understand it only as we seriously go through. Because I would venture to claim that the entire book 3 of Moreh Nevuchim, which is an explanation of the logic behind the entire Torah and why the Torah is so important in bringing ethical and moral lessons to live by for the entire world, why the Torah is the start and the basis, that is the demonstration of why Moshe is special and different, right? Because what Moshe set in motion, right, is something that no other, everyone else since him is riding on his shoulders. But we'll see that. But so I just wanted to, these are just introductions. Now that we have the introductions, I'll go to the hands that's up, and then we'll start chapter 35. Go ahead, Yosef.
So, Rabbi Dr. Shul, that's almost exactly what I wanted to say, which is that even if somebody comes and says something else, we don't have to believe them because we have our faith, and therefore, since we have the fundamentals of faith that Moshe Rabbeinu gave us, we don't need to suspect that there's other options, because maybe there are, but they're not for us.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's definitely a good point. But the main point that Rambam is going to emphasize that there is no one else can claim to be the level of Moshe. But let's see. So let's read 35. I've already explained to all the 4 differences by which the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu is distinguished from the prophecy of others. Right? We talked about it back in in book 1. So that Moshe spoke to God face to face, whatever that means. He heard directly from God, not in a vision. That Moshe was able to on demand talk to God. It didn't just happen. It was something that he was able to go and talk, right? So these are things that we explain. And I have proved it and made it manifest in the commentary of the Mishnah Torah. Go look there in Hilchos Yesodei HaTorah, right? And you'll see it, and so on. I made a mistake when I said in book 1. It's not there. It's in the other books that the Rambam wrote. Accordingly, there's no need to repeat it. Moreover, it does not enter into the purpose of this treatise. To sit and line up the differences between Moshe and the other prophets doesn't have a place here. I will let you know that everything I say on prophecy in the chapters of this treatise refers only to the form of prophecy of all the prophets who were before Moshe and will come after him. So I'm about to describe to you, the only thing I'm going to describe to you is everything except for Moshe. The nature of Moshe's prophecy, I'm not going to talk to you about, right? It's a different category. It's something else. I'm not discussing it. I'm talking about all the other prophets, which to me that says the Rambam is saying, I'm going to talk to you about the kind of prophecy that you and I have access to in some way, shape, or form, right? I'm not saying that you and I are necessarily going to be prophets, but the prophecy that every human being can, on some level, achieve if all the circumstances are right, right? As for the prophecy of Moshe, I shall not touch upon it in these chapters with even a single word, either in explicit or in a flash. In other words, I'm not even going to hint towards Moshe's. That's a different ballgame. For to my mind, the term prophet used with reference to Moshe and the others is ambivalent. In other words, right, remember how Rambam says you can use one word and it can mean two different things. So when we call Moshe Rabbeinu a prophet, and when we call Isaiah a prophet, we mean two different things. They're two different things. Moshe was one thing, and Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel and et cetera, those were different things, right? The same applies, in my opinion, to his miracles and to the miracles of others, right? For his miracles do not belong to the class of the miracles of the prophets. When Moshe performed a miracle, it was a different kind of miracle. And you can start seeing a little bit of a hint of what I was saying, what he's saying here, but in a minute. Because what Moshe's miracle, we're going to find out in a minute, was different because Moshe's miracle was meant to teach the entire world a lesson. Moshe's prophecy was meant to change the entire world, change the entire path of morality and ethics for the entire world, right? That made and the same thing with Moshe's miracles. His miracles were meant to change the world, right, in ways that the other prophets were not. The proof taken from the law as to his prophecy being different is because God said, I appeared unto Abraham, but Bashmi Hashem lo nodati lahem. I didn't use the word Shem Hashem. It informs us that his apprehension was not like that of the patriarchs. The way Rambam understands that verse is that Moshe saw God in a different way than the other prophets did. As for the difference between his prophecy and those who came after, it says there has not arisen a prophet since Israel like unto Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. Okay, that I just turned the page to 368. Thus it has been made clear that his apprehension is different from that of all those who came after him, which is, even though it says, Mamlachas Kohanim v'Goy Kadosh, right? Right? Even though among all, the prophets of the people of Israel, God exists, but he was different nonetheless. And all the more so, the operation of those that came from other religious communities. Again, Rambam is granting that a prophet can arise under the right circumstances from the other nations. If a person were to perfect himself or herself on an emotional, a moral, ethical, and intellectual level, one can achieve that level because, again, it's naturalistic. There's no reason why it should be only among Jews. It could be among anyone. As for but if among Jews God didn't appear like he did with anyone else to Moshe, then certainly among no one else. As for the difference between his miracles in general and those of every prophet, what about the miracles? It should be said that all the miracles worked by the prophets before them were made known to a few people only. Almost all the miracles you find happened in a specific instance with a specific set of onlookers, right? They were interpersonal miracles. Think of the Elisha and the woman with the jug of oil or something. It happened between those two. In fact, it was just it was kept secret from most of the other people around. And the only ones that saw and knew were the ones that were there, right? Or the ones to whom it was supposed to be revealed for whatever reason that prophet felt and God felt it was appropriate for that person to learn that lesson. So do you see that the king of Israel inquired about them, asking Gehazi to communicate them information about them? Where he says, and you can read the verse, the same holds good for the signs of all the prophets except for Moshe. That's true if you look through all the prophets. Now, how well that holds up, you can go through everything yourself and see whether you think it's really true that it holds up to every miracle, but Rambam is saying that it does. So you just have to take his word for it, right? That every other miracle is just for those individuals involved. For that reason, Scripture makes it clear, likewise, by way of information with reference to him, that no prophet will ever arise who will work signs both before those who are favorably and those unfavorably disposed towards him, as was done by Moshe. Moshe's miracles were everyone saw, the good guys and the bad guys, because it was a lesson for everyone in the world to learn, right? This is the meaning of the dictum, and there hath not arisen a prophet since, and so on, and all the signs and wonders, and so on, in the sight of Israel. For here it establishes a connection and a tie between the two notions. Namely, there will not arise someone who will have an apprehension similar to Moshe, and there will not arise someone who perform miracles similar to Moshe. Thereupon it makes clear that those signs were worked in front of Pharaoh, all his servants, and all his land, who were unfavorably disposed to him. In other words, even those that weren't interested in learning the lessons of Torah. Pharaoh and his servants were interested in enslaving the Jewish people. They weren't interested in learning about God. But God nonetheless showed them these miracles in order for them to learn the lesson, right? So this was a thing that had not happened to any prophet before him. The first thing that might come to mind is, of course, Eliyahu on Har Carmel, Elijah on Mount Carmel, where the impression that we have in our minds is the impression of masses of people watching, especially mass. There were also all those followers of Baal who were watching. So this seems to contradict that. You should not, but Rambam is going to get to that in a minute, but also the idea of in Joshua's time when God made the sun stand. Surely if the sun stops, the whole world noticed that the day's longer. So Rambam says you should not be led astray by that which is said with regard to the light of the sun standing still for Joshua for certain hours. For it does not say all Israel, right? It doesn't say that all of Israel saw it. The only people that noticed were the people that were there at the battle. Similarly, Eliyahu on Har Carmel performed his actions before a small number of men. There was a bunch of people watching, but it was not everyone. It wasn't the whole community. It was a few people that came to watch. Presumably people that actually wanted to learn, right? Is God the real one or is Baal the real one, right? And those people that were watching saw the miracle. I said certain hours, when going back to the sun thing, because it appears to me that the words kayom tamim mean as the longest day that may happen, for tamim means perfect. It was as if it said that the day of Gibeon was for them as the longest of the days of the summer that may occur there. So what they experienced was not even a day that was necessarily miraculous. It was a day that was as long as a day could possibly be. Bottom line is, don't worry about those problems. I still stand by what I say, Rambam says, that Moses' miracles were different. After the prophecy and the miracles of Moshe have, in accordance with my injunction, been set apart in your mind. Okay, now that we remove that from your brain, right? Take Moshe, put him in a different category. Seeing that the extraordinary character of his apprehension is similar to the extraordinary character of his actions, Moshe was in a different class. And after you have come to believe that his is a rank that we are incapable of grasping in his true reality, now you shall hear what I say in all these chapters about prophecy and the degree of the prophets in respect of prophecy. All these degrees being after this degree of Moshe. This was the purpose of this chapter. In other words, I told you this chapter to take Moshe out of your mind, to take Moshe's miracles out of your mind. And even though I didn't explain it, Rambam did nothing in this chapter to explain to us exactly what it was that Moshe achieved and how he achieved it and why and what made it different. All I'm telling you is that it's different, and I'm not going to talk about it. So let's talk about the other prophets and how that works. So chapter 36 is one of the most important. I mean, there's a lot of them, but there's a lot of stuff in this chapter, and hopefully we'll get through it tonight. That is very important. Now, bear in mind what I told you about the active intellect, right? Which is the active intellect, that the intellect that makes decisions, that makes things happen, right? And that we have within us, right? Which is also depending on the context, it could refer to God as being the active intellect that runs the entire universe, right? And now remember, this was not in the Rambam's mind. This was a concept of physics, right? The active intellect comes from the Aristotelian idea of what's powering the universe, right? This was not a concept of spirituality per se, right? And the intellect within us, right? Okay, so let's, or which was also called the rational faculty. That's the little bit that we have that gets influenced by the spheres above us, which are influenced by the spheres above them, which are influenced by the spheres above them, and so on, all the way back to God, right? We have that little bit within us that is our active intellect, our rational faculty, which thinks and makes decisions and decides on how we're going to act and what we're going to do and how we're going to live. So the true reality and quiddity of prophecy consists in its being an overflowing from God. It's reiterating what I said in what I just said. May he be cherished and honored through the intermediation of the active intellect toward the rational faculty in the first place, right? That's how it goes into our brain. In our brain, our rational faculty is directly being influenced by that rational faculty, that active intellect that started with God. Within us, and this, if this sounds similar to the Kabbalistic concept of Chelek Elokam Mimal, a piece of God from above that resides with us in our soul, then so be it. So it's similar, okay? But the Rambam is saying this on a level of physics, right? This is how our brain has that active capacity of thinking and therefore deciding to do and making us do stuff, right? And thereafter toward the imaginative faculty. And then that rational faculty can then control or have influence upon our imaginative faculty. Remember, our imaginative faculty is that part of the brain that had within resides. There was a point, I forgot which chapter, where Rambam equated the imaginative faculty with the Yetzer Hara, right? With the evil inclination. The imaginative faculty, which is that which drives us to do bad, right? But the rational faculty can influence it, or can be influenced by it, depending on how we run it. So if you that imaginative faculty is the part of our brain that imagines and dreams and thinks and wants and desires and so on. All of that is in the imaginative faculty. It's not being controlled by us. It's the stuff that goes on in our brain, right? So, but if we can take that rational faculty, right, and control the imaginative faculty, right, then we will have achieved prophecy. I know that's a whopping sentence I just said. So hold that sentence as we read the rest of the chapter and think about it. This is the highest degree of man and the ultimate term of perfection that can exist for his species. And this state is the ultimate term of perfection for the imaginative faculty. This is something that cannot by any means exist in every man. The ability for the rational faculty to control the imaginative is something that not every person can do. And it is not something that may be attained solely through perfection in the speculative sciences and through improvement of moral habits. Simply by just learning a lot of science and knowing a lot of stuff and being a basically good person is not enough to really control that imaginative faculty. When you close your eyes and turn off your brain, most of us still have some selfish desires, still have needs and wants that are not necessarily in a full compliance with what a moral, ethical, and intellectually perfect person should be, right? Even if all of them have become as fine and as good as can be, right? It takes more than that. There is needed, in addition, the highest possible degree of perfection of the imaginative faculty in respect of its original natural disposition, right? That imaginative faculty has to become perfect, right? It has to be perfect so that when you close your mind, you're not dreaming about corned beef, or you're not having dreams about illicit sexual desires, right? But you're having dreams about images of world peace, right? Or images of perfection, of true compassion, images of love towards God and love of humanity, images of a better future for the world. That's when you get to that point, you're getting close to where you'd be on the level of prophecy, right? When you're not thinking about yourself. And I'd say that it's not just me saying it. You'll see how the Rambam deals with this in a minute. Now, you know that the perfection of the bodily faculties to which the imaginative faculty belongs, right? Right. The imaginative faculty, the Rambam says, is part of our bodily stuff, right? We have organs, right? And in this case, we have a brain. And this is what the brain does. It thinks about what it wants, right? Right? The brain thinks about, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I want to have sex, the things that our brain thinks it wants to do, right? Our brains think that way. That's what our brains do, right? So any bodily faculty, it's consequent upon the best possible temperament, the best possible size, the purest possible matter. So the arm, for example, would have to be the right size arm, the right type of arm, be made out of the right stuff in order to do the best arm functions. The same thing, the brain. It has to be the right size brain, the right type of brain, made out of the right stuff, right? I mean, what we would say today, it has to have the right DNA, right? That makes it up, right? It's not a thing whose lack could be made good or whose deficiency could be remedied in any means of a regimen. If you have an arm that's deficient, a person that, Olenu is born with the deformed arm, the arm is deformed, it can't become a perfect arm. The arm itself, you can work with it and try to use it at its best possible, but it's never going to be perfect if it's physically deficient, right? So our imaginative faculty has to have the right stuff, right? So with regard to a part of the body whose temperament was bad in the original natural disposition, if you had a bad part of the body to begin with, the utmost, the corrective action, right, is to keep it in some sort of health, but it can't make it the best possible. If, however, its defect derives from its size, position, or substance, I mean the substance of the matter from which it is generated, there is no device that can help. I just turned to page 370. You know all this. It's useless to explain it at length. You can't take something that's inherently bad, right, and make it into something good. If you have a car and it's a little Toyota from 1980, you can't make it into a 2024 Maserati, right? You can't. You can fix the Toyota so that it runs, right, and that it turns right when you go right and left when you go left and forward when you hit the gas. But you can't turn it into something that it's not, right? So in other words, so your imaginative faculty has to start out with the right physical qualities. You know, too, that the actions of the imaginative faculty that are in its nature, such as retaining things perceived by senses. What does the imaginative faculty do? It smells something. That smells good, right? Right? It sees something. Ooh, that looks nice, right? It feels something. Oh, that feels good, right? And the imaginative faculty starts saying, oh, I like this, right? Or the opposite. I don't like this, right? This doesn't look good. This doesn't feel good, right? This doesn't smell good, right? So it combines these things and imitates them. And then within the imaginative faculty, thoughts of those things that it's experiencing in the world around it start to bounce around, right? And you know that its greatest and noblest action takes place only when the senses rest and do not perform their actions. When you go to sleep and you turn off all those senses and there's no external stimuli, now that imaginative faculty really goes to work, right? It is then that a certain overflows to this faculty according to its disposition, and that's the cause of veridical dreams. In other words, dreams, truthful dreams, where our brain goes to where our brain wants to go on its own, right? In other words, this part of the brain. This same overflow is the cause of prophecy. This dream is the cause of prophecy. Now, how could that be? Is every dream prophecy? Well, let's see. Let's see how that works. There's only a difference in degree, not in kind, right? So this imaginative faculty that our brain is thinking of things, right? That we don't necessarily perceive because we worked out the mathematical formula to get us to that conclusion. There's just that wisdom that's in there, right? That's prophecy. That's a strong statement. So, sages have said a dream is the 60th part of prophecy, but there's a problem, right? No proportion, however, can be established in two things differing in their species, right? So if two things are completely different, I can't say that this is a tenth of that. So you can't say the perfection of a man is a certain number of times greater than the perfection of a horse. So perfect horse is one thing. It's a horse that can run, can carry things, can do things, can whatever. A perfect human is a totally different thing, right? At least in Rambam's understanding, right? But a dream is always a little bit of prophecy, because in a dream, it's our imaginative faculty tapping into this wisdom that's just there, right? It's an extorted comparison. For unripe fruit is the individual fruit itself, but one that has fallen before it was perfect and before it had matured, right? Similarly, the action of imaginative faculty in the state of sleep is also its action in the state of prophecy. It's doing the same thing, right? However, there's a deficiency in it and does not reach its ultimate term. But the imaginative faculty of you and I is deficient. It's not good enough, right? So why should we teach you by the means of the dicta made of every lesson? Leave aside the text of the Torah. I just brought you from the Chacham and from Chazal. I'll bring you the pasuk. It says, "If there be a prophet among you, I, the Lord, make myself known to him in a vision." Right? I speak with him in a dream. Right? So God already tells us that a prophecy is a dream. So our dreams are prophecy. Now, what does that mean? Thus he, may exalted, has informed us the true reality and quiddity of prophecy, and has let us know that it is a perfection that comes in a dream or a vision. The word mara derives from the word ra'o, to see. This signifies that the imaginative faculty achieves so great a perfection of action that it sees the thing as if it were outside. When we dream of things or we have a vision of things, even if it's a waking dream, right? We see it in our minds as if it was real, as if we were looking at it. So when we close our eyes and dream tonight, if you have an image of a tree, it's as real to your brain as if you were actually standing and looking at a tree, right? Your brain has the ability to make that knowledge that way. And that the thing whose origin is due to it appears to have come to it by the way of external sensation. You may even smell it. You may feel the breeze in your dream, right? And these two groups, I mean vision and dream, all the degrees of prophecy are included. That's what I'm going to explain different degrees on how one perfects those visions and gets them to a higher level of prophecy. But at any level, they are a prophecy. The images that our brain itself comes up with, that is prophecy. It is a known that a matter that occupies, and now Rambam says something interesting. So if you occupy yourself greatly with being bent upon it and desirous of it while he's awake and while his senses function, all day you are, I don't know, you work in a fish store, and all you dream of every day is slicing the fish into beautiful fillets for sale, right? And scaling them and skinning them and making nice, beautiful fillets and your boss tells you when you make the nicest salmon fillets and people come and buy it, they'll give you an extra bonus, right? And all day you're slicing salmon fillets, right? At night, you're going to be dreaming about salmon fillets, right? Because that's what you're involved in all day. And to you, the height of achievement and greatness is a really nice, beautiful pink fillet of salmon, right? Which is juicy and smooth and with no skin and bones in it. It'll just look perfect there in the window, right? So is the one with regard to which the imaginative faculty acts while he's asleep, when receiving an overflow of the intellect corresponding to his disposition. It would be superfluous to quote examples, so he's not going to bother with the salmon example like I just did, right? Because everybody knows this, right? If you're thinking about something all day and you're doing something all day, and that's what you're involved in all day, then that's what you're going to dream about, right? Right? Because that's what the imaginative faculty, that's what the senses are sensing all day, right? That's what you're involved in, whether it's because your rational faculty is constantly thinking about them or because you're living a life that's what you're constantly experiencing. You're constantly exposing yourself to views and visions of whatever that thing is. So after these preliminaries, so you can start thinking how he's going to get to what a higher level of prophecy is, right? What you should be doing all day and what kind of visions your imaginative faculty is capable of coming up with if you're dreaming about things other than salmon fillets, which aren't that bad. But imagine if what you're dreaming about are things that are inappropriate. What you're thinking about all day is how to take advantage of your friend, how to make a really good deal that gives you the best advantage and puts everyone else at the biggest disadvantage. How you can always be the one that wins, right? No matter who, how I can get away with defrauding XYZ, fill in the blank, right? And then imagine where your imaginative faculty is going to be when you're dreaming at night, right? What kind of things you're going to be thinking about, right? Or if you're thinking all day about how I couldn't care less when people are suffering in fill in the blank, right? Or so on and so forth, right? If that's your life, if that's what you're thinking, this is why moral and ethical qualities are so important to becoming a real prophet, right? So that your imaginative faculty doesn't dream up of things that you're not supposed to be dreaming. It dreams up of things that are the actual wisdom that comes from God. But I'm ahead of myself. But I'm just trying to give you a sense of where Rambam is going. After these preliminary propositions, you should know that the case to be taken into consideration is that of a human individual, the substance of whose brain is at the origin of his natural disposition is extremely well proportioned because of the purity of its matter and the particular temperament of each. In other words, I'm telling you, remember I told you that if you have a bad arm, no matter what you do, it's still going to be bad if it's compositionally bad, right? But our brains are compositionally good, Rambam is saying. The human brain has its natural ability, right, to its size and position, where it is in our body, how big it is, what it's made out of, and is not affected by hindrances due to temperament, which derive from another part of the body. Temperament in the Rambam scheme and in Galen's scheme would come from other parts of the body, which give you anger or things like that. But the brain itself, which is imagining stuff, right? Thereupon, that individual would obtain knowledge and wisdom until he passes from potentiality to actuality and acquires a perfect and accomplished human intellect and pure and well-tempered human moral habits, right? So because a person has a brain which is ready to be that imaginative faculty that imagines the right stuff, right? The stuff that is true, right? If that person has well-tempered human moral habits and an accomplished human intellect, in other words, he trains himself to think things through rationally and appropriately, right? He doesn't, he thinks, which requires wisdom, requires intellectual knowledge. Then all his desires will be directed to acquiring the science of the secrets of what exists, the knowledge of what it causes, right? It's almost like, if you think about it, if anyone of us has ever tried to work through a really serious problem, whatever field it is that we're involved in, right? Whether we're fixing things, we're trying to figure out how to fix a machine, or whether we're physicians or attorneys or whatever it is that we do, if we're stuck with this particularly difficult conundrum and we happen to be experts in whatever field it is that we're doing, and we think about it and we read and we learn and we study, and then we go back to the sources and we try to reason it out, and then we discuss it with our colleagues, and it's just not getting there. And then all of a sudden, right, because of all that work, it's just there. The answer, the imaginative faculty, is just there, right? So and that's what happens. That's what our brain is able to do, right? His thought will always go towards noble matters, and he will be interested only in the knowledge of the deity and in reflection on his works. He will be thinking about knowing God, and he will be thinking about God's creations and what ought to be believed with regard to that, and what he ought to think about God and his creations. By then he will have detached his thought from and abolished his desire for bestial things. I mean the preference for the pleasures of eating, drinking, sexual intercourse, and in general of the sense of touch. Rambam was really not hot on the touch, which he associated, as you can see, with sexuality, which is, he's really following the example of Aristotle. Nowadays, people have different thoughts on these things, but we're learning Rambam. Or with regard to which Aristotle gave a clear explanation in the Ethics, saying that this sense is a disgrace to us. How fine is what he said, and how true it is that it is a disgrace. For we have it in so far as we are animals, like the other beasts, and nothing that belongs to the notion of humanity pertains to it. That desire for sexuality is something that's animalistic. It doesn't have any special human component to it. Again, this is completely taken straight out of Aristotle. As for the other sensual pleasures, those, for instance, that derive from smell, hearing, seeing, they are also found sometimes in animals, although they are corporeal. Pleasure for man, as Aristotle has explained, but they also have a little bit higher level of sensation to them. We have been led to speak of things that are not of the purpose with the need for. In other words, I just went a little bit off track, right? But I went off track not for completely no reason. For most of the thoughts of those who are outstanding among the men of knowledge are preoccupied with the pleasures of this sense and are desirous of them, right? If we're looking at if we look at the people who are preoccupied, and here the Rambam is really zeroing in on something important, and think for a moment about fraudsters who present themselves as prophets. And this happens. I read the news tomorrow, someone else will be there. And it can happen in every religion, right? The sin that they almost always are guilty of, right? It's almost always a sexual sin. I mean, you can list the lists in your brain of the people in the last several generations who made the news in just about every religious denomination that exists on the world, including, unfortunately, our own, of course, right? And then they wonder how it is that they do not become prophets, if prophecy is something natural. Maybe they learned a lot. Maybe they intellectually achieved a lot of levels. Maybe they did all the rituals that in their particular religious tradition they thought were supposed to be good. But because they couldn't get out of their mind that desire, and that's what they'd spent so much time doing, they wonder why they're not prophets. Well, that's why they're not prophets, because they have to learn how to separate themselves from that selfish desire. It is likewise necessary for the thought of that individual should be detached from the spurious kind. And then secondly, the second thing is, what's the second thing that the flaws that people have, right? It's arrogance, right? The spurious kinds of people that think of themselves and all they want is to be the boss. They want to be the big guy. They want to be the guy in charge of everyone else. And his desire for them should be abolished. If he wants to truly achieve the levels of prophecy, no matter how smart or how well-versed he is in whatever religion he is, if his desire is to be the overlord over others, if his desire is to take advantage of his position for himself and not over others, he'll never achieve prophecy, right? Because that's what his brain is thinking, and his imaginative faculty is going to think about how to step on other people. When he dreams at night, is he going to be dreaming about world peace, or is he going to be dreaming about what I can do to A, get my pleasures and desires satisfied, or B, or both, right? How I can take advantage of everybody else for my own gain, right? I mean, the wish to dominate or be held great by the common people and to obtain for them honor and obedience for his own sake. That's what he's going to be dreaming about, himself on a mountaintop with hundreds of thousands of people screaming, you know, Joe, Schmo, you're the great guy, right? We love you. And talk about how many people came to my inauguration, right? That's what he's going to be screaming, right? Because that's what he's dreaming about, okay? So and if you can catch the references, then you now know my political affiliations, and that's just the way it is. If you don't like it, I'm sorry. But you can disagree with me, that's fine. But I'm, you know, we all have to respect each other. And I'm sorry I got totally off track, but not off track. But that's the point. That's what I'm saying. That's what he's going to dream about. That's what he's going to think about, because all he's thinking about is himself. His imaginative faculty, that's all he knows how to imagine, right? He should rather regard all people according to their various states with respect to, right, which they are indubitably either like domestic animals or like beasts of prey. This is very hard. I had to go through several translations to see what this means. And this is the way I understand this sentence. In other words, those people who are thinking of only themselves, in that sense, they are just like animals or beasts of prey, right? Right? Because he all he's thinking is about his own self-gratification, his own honor, his own whatever. Everyone should be obedient to me, rather than thinking about the people for who they really are. Now, if the perfect man who lives in solitude thinks of them at all, he does so only with a view to saving himself from the harm that may be caused by those among them, or harmful if he happens to associate with them, or to obtaining an advantage that may be obtained from them if he is forced to it by some of his needs, right? If you know, a perfect man who, if he's thinking of others at all, right, a person who's, you know, living on a mountaintop, right, the only reason why he thinks of others, right, is to thinking of himself of how they could harm him, right, and what advantage he can gain from them. I don't think this word "a perfect man" means perfect in the sense that he that he's a good person. I think he's still talking about the person who's only thinking of himself. And so, in other words, when he's among others, all he could think about is how to take advantage of them and what he gains from them. And when he's not among others, to the extent that he thinks about other people at all, the only thing he's going to be thinking about is if he should meet somebody, how he can get something from them, right? So, in other words, being a man on the mountaintop doesn't necessarily insulate you from this danger, right? Now, there is no doubt that whenever in an individual of this description, right, and what I think he means now is an individual of this description, the one that I was describing before, a person who is truly moral and ethical, right? That kind of person, right? And I know I had to go through this in the Hebrew and a couple other translations to get this, because this paragraph seemed to jump back and forth. And I might be wrong about this, but this is how I understand it. Where am I up to? I lost myself. It's imaginative, which is as perfect as possible, acts and received from the intellect an overflow corresponding to his speculative perfection. This individual will only apprehend divine and most extraordinary matters. A person who avoids the selfishness and and thinking all day about his own personal desires, but he intellectually perfects himself and morally and ethically perfects himself. That kind of person, his imaginative faculty will be thinking about those kinds of things, and his imaginative faculty will achieve a level of prophecy that he will see God and he will see angels, and he'll be only aware and achieve knowledge of matters that constitute true opinions and general directives for the well-being of men in their relations with one another. He'll be thinking about how people can get along with one another. He'll be thinking about world peace, right? He'll be thinking about how can I resolve conflicts among others? How can I bring about a better world? How can I know more about God? It is known that with regard to these three aims set forth by us, namely the perfection of the rational faculty through study, right? That part of our brain that thinks actively, we need to study, we need to learn, and it has to be rational, it has to be reasonable, it has to think. I learned that A plus B equals C, and C plus D equals E, and so on and so on. I need to think this through. It all has to work. I have to work through real knowledge. And then the perfection of the imaginative faculty through natural disposition, by living a good life, by occupying yourself in good things, and so on. By doing that way, that changes our imaginative faculty so that our brain imagines goodness and compassion and so on. And the perfection of moral habit through turning away of thought from bodily pleasure. Stop thinking about selfish desires and putting an end to the desire for various kinds of ignorant and evil glorification, thinking about how great it is when 100,000 people call you great, right? There are among those who are perfect very many differences in rank. People can achieve that level, but some can achieve it to level A, some can achieve it to level B, some can achieve it to level C, right? There are going to be different levels in rank. And on the differences in rank with regard to these aims, there depend the differences in rank that subsist between the differences between the degrees of all the prophets. And when I describe to you the different degrees of prophecy, it's how far have you gone up the ladder to achieve that. So all of a sudden, right? So the Rambam is giving us an extremely rationalistic, extremely sensible understanding. He told us, number one, prophecy is a dream. It's something that you and I scientifically know happens. It happens in a brain, right? Which is in an actual organ that's a physical organ, the Rambam describes. And that imaginative faculty, as we all know, is influenced by the kind of lives we live, by what we occupy our minds with, and how we occupy our time, right? And if we rationally, right, train our brain to think rationally and reasonably, right, and learn knowledge and intellectually perfect ourselves, and if we live a life that's morally and ethically upstanding and concerned with the good to others and not just with selfish desires, we will then automatically achieve a point where our dreams and our visions will be the kinds of dreams and visions that will be prophecy. And in this way, we're all capable of prophecy. And then it's hard. I know I'm getting close to the end, but I got to finish this chapter. And I'm sorry, I'm just going to do this last paragraph. I'm going to run through it a little quick, but there's something in here that's just really, really beautiful and important. And if we go a little over time, I apologize. We'll go a little over, but that every bodily faculty sometimes grows tired, is weakened, is troubled, right? This is a bodily faculty. That imaginative faculty sometimes gets exhausted or sometimes isn't 100% right. You're working all day, your arm gets tired. Accordingly, you will find that prophecy ceases when you're sad or angry, right? And he brings proofs, right, that when you're sad or angry, right, and I'm kind of skipping to the top of 373. Why is that? Because when we're sad or we're angry, those emotions get in the way of our ability to have that perfect ethical and moral state where our imaginative faculty will be thinking about love and compassion and the things how to bring about peace among others, et cetera, et cetera. When we're sad or we're angry, we're inherently a little bit selfish, right? And we're going to lose it. And here the Rambam is really giving us a hint. What did he mean when he said that sometimes God takes away and says that you don't get prophecy today, even though you're a genius and you're the greatest, whatever, right? God takes it away because he made the world in such a way that if you're going to be a little bit sad, a little bit angry, a little bit selfish, nope, you're not going to get prophecy, right? It's not going to happen because that's not how the world works, right? This was even even though the imaginative faculty did not enter into this. Okay, so it was talking before I skipped that. For as we have mentioned several times, he did not prophesy like the other prophets. I mean, the parables, right? In other words, even Moshe, right? After Moshe got angry because of the spies and everything, God withheld prophecy from him because even he didn't get prophecy then. For as we have mentioned several times, okay, this will be made clear later on, for it's not the purpose of this chapter. Similarly, you will find that several prophets prophesied during a certain time, and then prophecy was taken away because it could not be permanent because of an accident, meaning something that happened in between. This is indubitably the essential and proximate cause of the fact that prophecy was taken away during the time of the exile. Why is it that after the exile started, there's no more prophecy? Here's where the Rambam says something beautiful. And for what languor or sadness can befall a man? And think about this. This is such a powerful thought. In any state that would be stronger than that due to his being a thrall slave in bondage to the ignorant who commit great sins, right? Rambam is saying, and I'm living in a world today where I am a slave to the Sultan, right? right? Rambam is saying, right? I'm a slave in Egypt now, because that's where he's living when he's writing this book, to a government that runs on evil and bad ideas. I mean, this is an arrow straight into the heart of our exile under Islam and Christianity, depending on where we live, right? Right? In whom the privation of true reason is united to the perfection of the lusts of the beasts, right? The people that are ruling us today and that we're subservient to today are people that are ruling for their own power, their own lust, their own desire. As long as we're subservient to that and we're in exile, how can we possibly ever get away from anger and sadness completely? And how can we ever achieve a level of true prophecy? Just think, let that sink in for a minute, right? This was, and he brings some quotes. This is true, and the cause thereof is clear. The instrument has ceased to function. But this will also be the cause for prophecy being restored in the days of the Messiah may be revealed soon. When Mashiach comes and will ruled by a person who is just and kind and righteous and is out for not for himself, but is out for the good of mankind, right? Like the visions of Isaiah, that's when we can live in a state where prophecy can exist again. But in a state where we live today, where we're under a thrall, slave, and bondage to the ignorant, right? In whom privation of true reason is united to the perfection of the lusts of the beasts. And think about that when we choose our leaders, right? And what kind of leaders we're supposed to choose, right? When we're in bondage to leaders who can only think about their own selfish desires and needs, right? There will never, ever, ever achieve prophecy in that world. Hence, prophecy ended actually during the time of the Second Temple, but certainly ever since we've been in exile. So this chapter had so much in it, and I managed to get to it before the hour. But if anyone wants to, there's so much there. So I'll open the floor to questions. If we go a little bit over time, it's not the end of the world.
I have a question. It
Please.
seems that Maimonides is really against selfishness. Now, by strict meaning of selfish means concerned with one's interests. It doesn't it doesn't really have any moral attachment to it. You were saying that you were selfish, you're bad. But if your interests are noble and your concern is, then your selfish interest would.
I mean, I think that I was using the term selfishness in its and the Rambam, when he's referring to it here, he's referring to its the bad parts of it. It doesn't mean you're not interested in taking care of yourself at all. In fact, to the contrary, the Rambam talks about how important it is to nourish our brain and to treat it properly and use it properly, right? So he's not against
that's a form of selfishness, though.
I guess you could say that, right? But he's in this context, he's referring, when he's criticizing it, I don't think he's criticizing all actions of self-interest. I think he's criticizing those whose day is occupied by thinking about his needs, not his needs, but what he wants to get from everyone else. That's the way I see it. But you're making a good point, though. I mean, obviously, self-interest is not necessarily the same as this kind of selfishness that he's criticizing.
Okay.
Any other comments?
There was a phrase. There was a quote in chapter 35 about Israel, like unto Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face.
Yes.
That really is an exaggeration, or didn't the encounter take place?
Because it wasn't his face, right? It was God's, right? But God said, "Upanai lo yiro." No human, even Moses, wasn't allowed to see his face. He just saw him from behind, right?
Yes. That's
unfortunately. I mean, Rambam refuses to describe to us in actual words what really Moshe's vision was like. Like he does say, he like I said, that God spoke to him directly, not in visions. That those are the things that Rambam referenced. But he doesn't really. He says, "I'm not going to tell you. I'm just going to tell you that it's different. Everything I tell you about prophecy is about all the other prophets." what did Rambam really think about Moshe's the nature of the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu? Was it? It seems like it wasn't just a different level. It's not like there was 49 levels and then the 50th level was Moshe's and nobody else ever got there, right? Because that would leave open the possibility that somebody else might one day get there, just like Moshe did, right? It's just that nobody happened to get there, right? But rather, there's levels of prophecy, which, he kind of laid the groundwork for how there's different levels today, and we're going to learn about the different levels as we go on. And then there's Moshe's, which is in a different category, right? And how and why Moshe's was in such a different category, he's going to leave for us to figure out on our own. I suggested, what I thought. I'll tell you that I got my thought. I have to give credit where credit is due. A lot of my thoughts on what Rambam really thinks. First of all, based a little bit on some reading from Ibn Kaspi, who is the 13th century writer, but also from Kenneth Zieskin, who I quoted a few times, who also mentions this and talks about how the third book is really where Rambam tells us, not directly, but indirectly, what makes Moshe's prophecy so different. Because Moshe's prophecy is the entire Torah. That's his prophetic teaching, right? It's the Torah. And the Torah has a characteristic and a quality that nobody can ever supersede. And the reason why nobody can ever supersede it is because anyone that gets up today and talks about, and this is me talking, and I'll admit a lot of these thoughts were planted in my head by reading Zieskin and other thinkers too, but is that Moshe came into a world where morality and ethics and God were not all connected, right? He was in a world where being moral wasn't necessarily how you achieved what you needed to achieve. I mean, it wasn't a thing, right? Animal sacrifice, human sacrifice was prevalent everywhere. I mean, it was just a totally different. Moshe Rabbeinu came down and said, "There's a God, and God wants us to live an ethical life." Right? He wants us to be kind to others. He wants us to treat others like we would want to be treated, and so on and so forth. Moshe came down and so anyone else who gets up, they might be able to add a little, change a little, maybe. Well, not necessarily change a little. That's not the right word, but direct it in a certain direction that might be more relevant to whatever time he or she's speaking. But anyone who gets up and talks about morals and ethics today is riding on the shoulders of Moshe Rabbeinu. And if somebody comes up and contradicts the fundamental ethics that Moshe taught us, we would know right away that he's a fraud, right? If someone would come up today and say, "No, you don't have to be honest. You can just lie and cheat," right? Well, I mean, some people might like that if they're the ones on the winning end of the lying and the cheating, but most of us will know right away, right, that this guy's a fraud. And so, you don't have to listen to Moshe. You can take advantage of other people, whether it's monetarily, sexually, or whatever. You can take advantage of other people, right? We know the guy's a fraud, or you better know the guy's a fraud, right? Mm-hmm. So that fundamental thing that Moshe set in this world can't be changed. We can ride on his shoulders, but if we tried to set another course, it would be false. It would be wrong. And if you tried to embellish, in other words, and enhance it and bring it forward to today, then you're riding on his shoulders. He's doing something very good, but you're not better than him, right? Right? If someone were to get up and talk to a situation today and say, "Look, we got to do the right thing," and show you how the right path is, well, then you're riding Moshe's shoulders. You're taking the principles that the Torah taught, and you're applying them. And it's not coincidental. The Rambam knew and understood that that whatever positive teachings Jesus, for example, had, right, about, don't do whatever, were coming straight from the Torah. The lessons that he had were not new. He was riding the shoulders of the Torah that was taught beforehand. So he can't come and say, "Oh, now I'm going to erase what Moshe did," because it doesn't make, you can't do that. You can, if you want to teach something based on it, fine. But if you want to repeal it, you can't be Moshe. No one else could be Moshe. Mm-hmm. But we'll see, because think about it in the back of your mind, and think about how, as we learn the next, however long it takes us, the next at least year and a half, 2 years or so, whether what I'm telling you makes sense to you.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions, comments? All right. Well, then hopefully next week we'll all get to it. Somebody said something in. All right. Well, yeah, that was Billy saying you're into the end. Very good. Thank you. So am I. And the Zohar class isn't starting anytime soon. But maybe one day we'll get there. All right. Have a
Thank
wonderful
you.
day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sal.
You're welcome.